Check Podcasts.
Hi, I'm Bruce Williams. I'm the CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to Chamber Chats, coming to you as always from here in the podcasting studios at the Czech Media Group. I would like to acknowledge, as always, that I live and work in the ancestral lands of the Lekwungen-speaking nations known to us as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. And Chamber Chats is made possible by the support of Island Savings, a division of First West Credit Union, who have a team of experts with solutions as unique as your business. So let's think for a minute that you just suddenly popped up on planet Earth and you started to look at the way things are named. You would look at a company called Amazon, but it has nothing to do with the river. You would take a look at a company called Apple that has nothing to do with fruit. But there are organizations like the one we're going to speak with today that are very clear on what they do in their name, because their name is the Canadian Coast Guard. They guard our coast. We're going to talk about that with our guest today, who's Derek Moss. He is the Associate Commissioner of the Canadian Coast Guard. How are you?
Very well, Bruce. Thank you for the invite.
So how much, when we say Coast Guard, how much coast are we talking here?
So I'll talk BC specifically.
Yep.
So the actual coastline is 26,000 kilometers.
Wow.
So that's a lot of coast to guard.
Yeah.
But of course, it's not just the coast, it's the waters off that coast. So when you capture the square kilometerage of the waters that we operate in, it's about 260,000 square kilometers.
Well, because that's all the shorelines of all the islands, little
All the
islands, small islands.
Absolutely. And then, of course, out to sea toward the 200-mile limit.
Yeah. Okay. You do cover the north too, do you not?
We do. So we have a ship out here, an icebreaker. Most people in Victoria would probably
We wouldn't need
raise
an
their
icebreaker.
eyebrows and say, what does an icebreaker do in Victoria? But
Yeah.
it goes up to the Arctic every summer to join ships from the eastern part of the country.
Mhm.
And it services northern communities, does what we call an ice breakout for the communities. So fishers, hunters fishers primarily can get out in the water.
Yep.
And of course, breaks ice and escorts commercial shipping to resupply Arctic communities.
So we all know the name Coast Guard. We recognize the orange ships when we see them on the water, but we still, which is what we're going to do today. We're going to figure out exactly what it is that you do and why you're so important to people. So
Wonderful.
first question is, how are you different from the Navy? And you're an ex-Navy guy, so you know both sides of it, but how do you differ from the Navy?
So first of all, our mandate is quite different. There's a very little bit of overlap, but we try and avoid redundancy.
Yeah.
So if you look at events on the water on a spectrum of safety, security to defense, the Coast Guard is settled in on the safety side, and we assist on the security side. The Navy assists on the security side and is very much responsible for the defense. So our mandate includes things that we're well known for, like search and rescue, for example, but also tasks that we're less well known for, what we call the maintenance of the aids to navigation, the buoys that kind of like are the medians
Yep.
and crosswalks of the ocean, of the waters, the ice breaking, which we mentioned briefly, traffic control. So much like an air traffic controller, we don't call them this, but they're sea traffic controllers, and they're sitting in front of a screen with dozens and dozens of vessels. So we keep that safe. Pollution response. We're the lead. We're the federal lead for oil spills on the water, taking care of hazardous vessels and supporting maritime security. So we've got a broad swath. There are some commonalities with the Navy, where we both provide federal fleets to the Government of Canada to service to Canada. And we both maintain what's called maritime domain awareness. So we build a picture of what's out on the waters of Canada and off to our 200-mile economic exclusion zone, so that we know what's going on in our backyard.
Your fleet is bigger than the Navy, is it not?
I like to remind every admiral that, yes.
Yes. But so the size of your fleet is actually pretty impressive. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so overall across the country, we have 120 vessels and 300 plus smaller craft like rigid hull and inflatable boats. On the West Coast, we have 28 vessels, so they can range from a 47-foot search and rescue lifeboat right up to the Sir Wilfrid Laurier, which is the icebreaker that I mentioned.
The ones that I guess that we see most frequently are the one that's either at Pat Bay or down near Ogden Point.
Right.
Tell me about those guys.
Okay, so we have so out at Pat Bay, we have our science vessels primarily. So folks may have seen a ship called the Tully, John Tully, as we like to call it. So it takes Department of Fisheries and Oceans scientists on board, and they go out and study the marine environment, whether that be water temperature, salinity, habitat, etc. And they study that and compare data points over years. Here in Victoria, that's Vic Base as we call it,
Hmm.
we're more prone to seeing the Sir Wilfrid Laurier and the Wilfrid Grenfell. They primarily, when they're down south, do buoy tending work and make sure that the buoys are in their proper position so that traffic can be kept safe.
So I mean, you're involved with security, not defense per se, but you say that there's a fundamental difference. You're both in different ministries. Like the Navy
Yes,
is under the Department of National Defense. You're under
fisheries and oceans.
Fisheries and Oceans. So that's
Yes.
kind of a telling story right there too. So you also, we'll get back to all of that stuff in a second. It's not just ships though. You have other craft, if you will. Tell me about those.
Yeah, exactly. So most folks might not realize we've got a couple of hovercraft.
Hmm.
They operate out of Sea Island in Richmond.
Hmm.
They're spectacular for search and rescue, their primary purpose, because they go 45 knots or so, which is a great rate of speed for a vessel on the water. Plus, they can get to places where ships with a deeper draft can't go. The shallower waters, we think of the mud flats right off the airport there.
Yeah.
So those are a couple of pretty exciting vessels. We've also got dedicated fish research vessels. So the Sir John Franklin came into the fleet about 3 years ago, built in Vancouver by Seaspan, and it's a trawler. So it has a bunch of scientists in a laboratory checking the fish, and that's how they do the studies, mercury levels, a whole bunch of stuff that's well beyond me because I never did well in grade 12 biology.
So part of what you're doing then would involve organizations like Ocean Networks Canada, based out of UVic.
Absolutely. And we partner with them. You mentioned Pat Bay. So the Institute of Oceanographic Science is out there.
It's across the street from you guys almost, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all right there. So I met with representatives right before Christmas. They have a facility there, and we support them wholeheartedly.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting to imagine what it would be like if you weren't there. Like when you talk about air traffic control on
Yeah.
water, what if you weren't there? What kind of chaos would ensue if you weren't there doing that?
Well, I think you hit the magic word, chaos. So there are rules of the road, as we call them, when vessels encounter one another on the open water, whether they can see one another or in fog, etc. But it's just common safety to have lanes mapped out so that one vessel is driving on the right side of the Straits of Juan de Fuca, and then the other is on its left. So we keep them well far apart.
So you mentioned the fact that there are Coast Guard stations up and down the coast of British Columbia and lots of them on Vancouver Island.
Yeah.
We want to talk about where they are and what they do, and we'll do that next. Our guest on Chamber Chats today is Derek Boss. He is the Associate Commissioner of the Canadian Coast Guard for us in this part of Canada. How many people make all this happen on all these ships? How many personnel are we talking?
So the Coast Guard in Western Region is 1,407. About half of them are seagoing. The other half either work a desk like myself, as I kind of joked about earlier.
Yeah.
My responsibilities include reading emails and signing things.
Yeah.
But we've got operational teams that deploy should there be a vessel that is sunk or grounded, a pollution hazard, a navigation hazard. We've got teams scattered up and down the coast with equipment depots up and down the coast who can rapidly deploy to go survey and then take necessary action.
We're going to talk about careers with the Coast Guard in a couple of minutes, but so what are the variety, the scope of work, the dimension that they're doing? What do these folks do?
It's a bit of an adventure, and you can kind of chart your own path,
Right.
which is, I think, one of the big attractions. So some people join for the environmental protection culture
Mhm.
that we have. So I've mentioned pollution response, so environmental response. We first of all help prevent incidents from happening, but should something occur and a substance like oil be released into the environment,
Mhm.
we're there to act first of all, assess the situation, contact neighbors. First Nations communities are first and foremost partners with us because most of the communities we go to, they know a lot better than we do.
Mm.
So those relationships are very strong. And then, of course, industry has a role. We partner with owners and industry funded response organizations that have equipment for cleanup alongside us.
So we're actually recording this on January the 10th, and a couple of days ago there was a barge that went on a little runabout up in
Up in
the peninsula
Saniston,
in
yeah.
Saniston. And today, this day in January, something's going on the mainland too. So when these barges suddenly come loose, what's your response to that?
So we have a team that grabs their duffel bag. We call them go bags,
Yeah.
and they're out the door. So usually in daylight conditions, because it's very difficult to assess oil in the water at light time unless there's a lot of harbor light, for example.
Okay.
But the team deployed, checked the site, confirmed with the owner whether there was petroleum or any similar products on board,
Mhm.
and then react as appropriate. So in this particular case, with the vessel down by the Mount Newton Crossroad, the team deployed, contacted the owner. They confirmed there was no pollutant on board. It wasn't a risk to pollute. It wasn't a risk to navigation.
Okay.
We put out a warning to mariners, letting them know it's there. And we have a very compliant owner who wants to get things done and get their barge back. So
Not bad.
that one is very straightforward. It can be more complicated, of course, and that requires bringing in more assets to help with the cleanup.
There's one in Point Grey that was actually reported today too. But even back after the big storm in November of 2021,
Yeah.
there was that barge that came up on the shore in Vancouver. What's the response procedure for that?
So Coast Guard's responsibility will be to ensure that it is not a hazard. And the word hazard has a very broad definition with us. It's not only a hazard to pollute, it might be a hazard to navigation. Ships can't get around it.
Mhm.
If there's an economic impact, one might think of Canada Place as a landmark site that people come and visit. Peggy's Cove is probably a great
In
example.
Nova Scotia,
If
yeah.
there's something off of Peggy's Cove, that has an economic impact. So that's a hazard. So we would then respond. If it's not a hazard, we still work with the owner. We demand a remediation plan.
Mhm.
And we approve it, and then in concert with Transport Canada, we'll assess the next steps of remediation.
So these stations that are located up and down the coast of British Columbia, on the Gulf Islands, all of the ones that you mentioned too. So
Yeah.
where are they primarily? You mentioned to me just before we started recording about Prince Rupert and places like that. But where are the primary stations?
Yeah, so we've got obviously here in Victoria, down near Ogden Point.
Hmm.
So that's Vic Base. That's our headquarters.
Hmm.
Out in Pat Bay, in North Saanich, the Institute of Oceanographic Science, and that's also where we have one of our two marine communications and traffic services centers.
Hmm.
Those are the air traffic controllers of the water.
The water, yeah.
So we have one station there and one up in Prince Rupert. And of all the maritime traffic that checks in across Canada, those two stations handle 52% of it.
Is that right?
They are busy, busy people.
Wow.
Because you can imagine ships coming in, not only going to Vancouver, but they're going to Seattle, Tacoma, perhaps. Prince Rupert
Yeah.
is only continuing to grow.
You got Ucluelet,
So
Port,
we've
Port Alberni.
Ucluelet, Port Alberni, Bella Bella, Tofino. I think we mentioned Port Hardy.
Yeah.
We've mentioned Richmond Kitsilano.
Okay.
So right in downtown Vancouver. So it's pretty much any dotted community along the coast,
Yeah.
and we have some form of representation there. And we've gone in. I mentioned First Nations communities. We've gone into several and partnered.
Hmm.
So
Port Hardy in particular.
Port Hardy's a great example. We made a mistake a few years ago building a search and rescue station, thinking it was rather innocuous, and we just kind of built it. And we failed to understand the proper need to consult.
Mhm.
So we took that lesson to heart, and last summer, yeah, I'm trying to get my date straight. Summer before, my
Okay.
apologies,
Yeah.
we opened up a base in Port Hardy across the harbor from the search and rescue station, and this time we got it right. We made sure we went and listened to Quaggle First Nation representatives,
Mhm.
what their desire for response capability was, what location would be acceptable, and right down to the very architecture. So the design, and it's a site worth visiting. If you
Yeah.
make a trip to Port Hardy and check out this building, it's absolutely gorgeous. The architecture is called Longhouse Formalism,
Hmm.
and there are three totem poles. So two are in the main entrance, carved by master carver Stan Hunt, and then they're 17 feet tall, and there's one out by the water, looking out to the water, carved by Stan's brother Calvin Hunt, another master carver, and that tells people, mariners, that they're entering Quagulf territory. They're absolutely stunning works of art.
Yeah. Just so dramatic.
Yeah.
Excuse me. When you talk about, you touched on it earlier about responding to a spill, for example. I wrote down some words here.
Yeah.
You use booms, sweeps, and skimmers.
Right.
What are they?
So a boom we would use to hold in a pollutant to a particular area. So
It's the circular looking
it's
thing.
the boat boom that you would put around.
Okay.
It holds in the fuel, and then we can manage the spill better. A skimmer we would use it. It skims the top of the ocean with this rotating brush, which picks up the oil and sticks to the brush, and then deposits it, in a tank,
On
and
board.
we deal with it afterwards.
Yeah.
So we've got, and then we've got ways of corralling um, the oil to make, and then funneling it in to containers to deal with it safely.
Yeah. We're going to talk about shoreline cleanup, and we're also going to talk about things like the remote areas in and around British Columbia that the Coast Guard keeps their eye on. We'll talk about that next. Our guest on Chamber Chats today is Derek Moss. Derek is the Associate Commissioner. Is that what I said? Associate Commissioner, yes.
Assistant
Commissioner, sorry, with the Canadian Coast Guard in this region right here. So when spills happen, sometimes it does get to the shore.
Yes.
You can't mitigate it all necessarily. What do you then do when it hits the shoreline?
Um, So I'm going to give you a bit of government speak. So technically, it's not the Coast Guard's mandate. However, we realize that we're there. We've got the skill sets. We've got trained people, and we participate in shoreline cleanup whenever we can. And we certainly try and partner with communities. It's a very emotional thing when there's oil on the beach near your community.
Yeah.
So we're very sensitive to the needs, the comments, the perceptions of people when we're going into their communities, and we want to be seen as helping out regardless of government mandate. But there are specialized companies and contractors that will bring in through typically the owner of a vessel to help with that shoreline cleanup.
Okay. You undoubtedly work in some way with the United States authorities as well, both in Washington State and I'm sure in Alaska too.
Yes.
What's that relationship and who are you working with in the States?
Yeah, spectacular. So I've got two counterparts. So U.S. Coast Guard District 13 is headquartered out of Seattle. Admiral Chuck Fossey is my counterpart. He was up here just before Christmas. We went to a Victoria Royals game together.
Nice. Did they win?
They did, actually.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say this. He even saw a fight and was really interested in that. So
it's not a game without a fight.
It was old-time Canadian hockey.
Yeah.
And then Admiral Megan Dean. She's the commander of U.S. Coast Guard District 17, headquartered out of Juneau, Alaska, and she manages all of the Arctic for the U.S. Our relationship is seamless. When I worked in my last job in Montreal, we would say with the U.S. Coast Guard that pollution, ice breaking, search and rescue, and illegal activity don't respect borders. So there has to be a lot of overlap and sharing of information between the two Coast Guards, and there is.
Yeah. I'm one of the people who went down to Dallas Road about a year and a half ago to watch the Zim Kingston, that ship, the container ship that caught fire and had a problem.
Yes.
And I remember at the time I was looking out there going, is that our waters or is it their waters? Was that both of you responding to that?
That was our waters.
That was ours. Okay.
However, we do have what we call a joint contingency plan co-signed by the Admiral and myself. So for Dixon entrance, it's Admiral Dean, and for down here Straits of Juan de Fuca, the San Juan Islands, Gulf Islands, it's myself and Admiral Fossey. That enables resources to, bad pun, spill over across the border, so that we can support one another. In that particular case, we didn't call on the U.S. for support. They were ready to go. Similarly, a year and a half ago, a fishing vessel called Aleutian Isle sank off San Juan Island, and we were poised to go over and assist. But the only thing we ended up sending, we had aircraft that we were sending to monitor waters, and we were checking the Canadian side of the strait to see if there was any spillage there. But very, very tight relationship, and we practice. We don't just sign documents and then walk away and see each other the next year. We get teams together multiple times throughout the year to practice both search and rescue and environmental response.
What is Coast Guard College?
So we mentioned this briefly earlier. So this is the best kept secret in Canada. And that's, I don't say that as a good thing. It shouldn't be a secret. We need to advertise.
That's why you're here today. We're talking about this.
So the Canadian Coast Guard College is in Sydney, Nova Scotia. It's an accredited college through the University College of Cape Breton. So students can go there. They apply just like any other university. They join. They're then members of the Coast Guard. They get a stipend to support them as they go through their 4 years of university education as either a marine engineer or a marine navigation officer. So they'll do a 4-year program. It's co-opt. So they'll do 5 months at the college and then 6 months on board a ship as a cadet. and that could be anywhere. They could find themselves up in the Arctic, on the Great Lakes, out here in beautiful British Columbia, and the lifestyle is just fantastic. When they finish that up, then they're deployed to a region in their first operational ship as part of the regular crew.
So they graduate into a job.
That's right.
Is it similar to a military college where there's a year or two of mandatory service after?
A little like that, yes.
bit,
So
yeah.
there's an expectation, and if they choose to do something else, then they pay back their education.
Okay. So once someone does take on a career with the Coast Guard, are they then trained continually? Can they upgrade their skills if they want to?
They can, and a lot of it is up to the individual. So there are opportunities within the Coast Guard to further your training, further your education, further your second language ability, a variety of opportunities. We present folks with opportunities, and then it's up to them to drive for the career that they want.
I would have to think within that, you mentioned that you do search and rescue earlier, which you
Yeah.
do. The skill set for search and rescue must include sort of like paramedic training as well as the other technical stuff they need to do.
It does. We have what we call a rescue specialist on board, and while not a doctor or nurse practitioner, they have very advanced first aid. We also have the ability to connect with doctors ashore. So through a system of basically telemedicine, if there's a particular case, we can call a doctor. They're 24/7, run through some symptoms, do some checks, and get that advice as well.
So if somebody wants to find out more about Coast Guard College or a career in the Coast Guard or just about the Coast Guard in general, where do we go to do that?
Well, like most places, we go to the internet. So you Google Coast Guard College. I must apologize. I can't remember the website off the
I
top of my
Google
head,
everything.
but
I don't
yeah,
remember websites. So.
exactly. So it's got a very user-friendly interface, and it can tell you exactly what the 4-year programs are, what they're all about, plus a variety of other training that Coast Guard members do. And those ship traffic controllers, they've got a 6-month course at the college before they come out to one of our operation centers.
Well, thanks for all you do. For you and the entire crews of all those ships doing what they do to keep us all safe and to keep the planet safe as well. Derek Moss is with the Canadian Coast Guard. Thank you for being here today.
It's absolutely my pleasure, Bruce.
I'm Bruce Williams, as he said, and we'll see you again for another Chamber Chat.